All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. I'm extremely excited for the show today. This is the first time in podcast history where I've hosted a formal debate. I have three incredible guests on my show today: Phil Saunders, Dr. David T. Beito, who you're familiar with because he's been on the show before, and Dr. Walter Block. I'm really excited to talk with them today, and we're going to be discussing the Israel-Palestine conflict. And we have a very specific proposition. A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed David Beito on his new book on FDR, and he talked me after the show about an idea he had for solving the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so we're going to be discussing that idea. And so the proposition for the debate today is going to be as follows. A Swiss-canton model of government could solve the Israel-Palestine conflict. Taking the affirmative are Dr. David Beito and Phil Saunders. Dr. Beito is a senior fellow at the Independent Institute, professor emeritus at the University of Alabama, and the author of several books such as FDR, A New Political Life. Phil Saunders is the chairman of three Israel-Palestinian NGOs, including Challenge, the Abrahamic Movement, and the Democracy and Federalism Hub. Taking the negative is Dr. Walter Block. Dr. Block is an Austrian economist and teaches at Loyola University, as well as an adjunct scholar at the Mises Institute and Hoover Institute. He is also the author of several books and hundreds of articles. Gentlemen, welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
So, as we said before, we're going to give both parties about a 12-minute block of time to explain their position. Since David and Phil are taking the affirmative on the proposition today, I'm going to let them begin. David and Phil, your 12 minutes begins now.
All right. Well, whatever our differences, and I'm sure they're considerable, perhaps we can start from a point of agreement. And here's a point of agreement I would propose: that we need a sustainable solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, because we're having wars every few years, violence, etc. And if we're going to have a sustainable solution that values individual rights, it's got to be in an environment of mutual gain, of free trade, of security for property and persons, protection of minorities, both religious minorities and political minorities. So hopefully you can agree also on some of the facts on the ground. Maybe not. But I would argue that we would argue, I think, Phil and I, that the obstacles to a two-state solution, even under the best of scenarios, have become almost insurmountable. The populations on both sides of the Jordan are too intermixed and too interdependent, and that's the aspect that's often not paid attention to, for that to really work anymore, if it ever could work. On the West Bank, for example, if you go to the first slide, please, there are more than 500,000 Jewish settlers scattered throughout the West Bank. So this isn't, dividing up the situation is going to be very difficult. Moreover, the settlers are more than capable of resisting attempts to remove them, and the process of removal would create great dislocation and great injustice. Many of the settlers were born in the West Bank. Many have developed strong local ties. And whether or not their parents or grandparents should have come there, we could have a debate about that, I suppose. But from a purely practical standpoint, they're there and we need to deal with it. The younger generations of Jews, many of them on the West Bank have been there all their lives, right? I don't think they should be forced to leave. I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't think it's very practical. Even in Israel proper, demographic dispersal and diversity is often the rule. Palestinians, or if you prefer to call them Israeli Arabs, but they are, they're the biological cousins of the Palestinians on the West Bank, constitute about 20% of Israel's population. Most, but not all, are Israeli citizens. In short, both Israel and Palestine are lands of many peoples, and these include not only Jews, but they include Muslims, Druze, Christians, and all of those come in many varieties. Moreover, even if geographic separation was possible, I don't think it's desirable. The many peoples of Palestine and Israel have become interdependent with a multitude of mutually beneficial economic relationships. In many ways, it no longer makes sense to describe Israel and Palestine as separate lands. These are really just two names for the same land, same one land. But selling the one-state idea to both Israelis and Palestinians is often difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. People in both groups have entirely legitimate concerns about the need to create checks and balances to protect their rights of self-government and their religious traditions. Moreover, it is also quite true that neither Palestinians nor Israelis, for the most part, want to merge and become one people. They value their cultural and other differences, and they want to protect those differences. They're different than a lot of countries in that respect, perhaps. For this reason, the model provided by the Confederation of Switzerland has much to offer. It is well suited to local conditions. I guess I'm almost running up on my time here, so I'll try to rush forward. Go to the next slide, please. This is the Swiss-canton model. Those are the coats of arms of each of the cantons. If you go to the next one, please. Now, one of the secrets to Switzerland's success is they have strong local government and a very weak federal government. A lot of the Swiss don't even know who their president is because they have a rotating presidency, right, chosen by the Swiss parliament. Go on to the next one, please. And that gives you a sense of the diversity in Switzerland, right, that they're dealing with, which is of comparable amount of diversity to what we face in Israel and Palestine. That's a language map: French, German, Italians, Romanish, and again, all living together in peace. Go to the next slide, please. Now, this system has brought Switzerland great success. The Cato Institute has ranked Switzerland #1 in human freedom in the world. And a lot of this does have to do, I think most people would agree, with Switzerland's unique system of decentralization, which has produced a large degree of internal free trade. Go on to the next one, please. Now, people were, consider what is the map? That's the common question. What is this going to look like? Well, I'm not the expert on this. The Federal Forum is the expert, but they have circulated several possible maps of what a canton system would look like in Israel and Palestine. So people have thought about this. And again, I think we've got the beginning of a debate, and that's all we're asking for here. Please go on to the next one. Now, one of the things that a canton system would avoid, again, if we had the Swiss model applied to Israel and Palestine, it would eliminate things like this, these internal barriers on trade. People waste a lot of time going through these internal checkpoints. We could eliminate all of them and produce a real bonanza from free trade. On to the next point, please. Now, the canton idea is nothing new. It goes back to the 1930s and 1940s. It was proposed by two leading Zionists, one of them Itamar Ben-Avi, the first native speaker of Hebrew. He proposed a canton idea. He was followed by Jewish Magnus, who was the president of Hebrew University. So some prominent advocates. And again, this was debated in the UN. And go to the next one, please. During 1947, the big debate, Magnus testified in favor of a canton system. And he, in fact, used the Swiss model. He said, Israel, Palestine could become a kind of crossroads for trade and human flourishing. Unfortunately, I think the UN had this issue. They debated it, and they rejected the idea of a federation of cantons. But it was very much on the table. They supported partition, which led to great conflict. Because, for example, the Jewish state created was almost 50% Arab, which is a recipe for disaster, which in fact did come, regardless of who was wrong or right in that war. So I'll stop there. I went over my time. I apologize to Phil for that.
Not a problem. Okay, so I will continue. First of all, let me say I'm sold, but that's no surprise. But I'll explain why that I came to the conclusion that a federal solution to the conflicts in this land, I believe, is the best one available. and it's because of where I live. I happen to live right next to the Green Line, and I'm just west of the Green Line in a town called Suhadasa, which is secular, progressive, and Zionist. But just 2 miles east of here, on the other side of the Green Line, is a large ultra-Orthodox settlement named Beito Elite, with about getting on to 100,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews living in the West Bank, or Judea, whatever we want to call it. And they are very different to us. They are very religious, traditional, and they're not Zionist. You don't see Israeli flags in their city. And so we're two very different identities, both Jewish, just a couple of miles away from each other. And on the other side of the road from Beit Elite is a Muslim Palestinian town, which has become this very interesting bridge that connects to both of these Jewish communities. Okay, the connection with Beit Elite is principally economic, because the ultra-Orthodox have large families and they don't have a lot of money. They need to be able to buy things cheaply, and a Palestinian town is the best place to be able to do that. And the Palestinians need Israelis to come in and buy their services and products. And there's also an interfaith connection between those two communities. They understand each other because they're both religious. Whereas my town, we will connect with the Palestinians on a different level. We will go to their natural springs and swim in the pools there and eat their food, which the ultra-Orthodox wouldn't be able to do because it's not kosher. And so we're connecting with them on a totally different wavelength. And so you have this very interesting situation where this Palestinian town acts as a bridge connecting. And so we've created this interesting triangular symbiosis where we each retain our own identities, and because we're each so different to each other, we have different things to offer each other, and so we become complementary as opposed to contradictory, and this created a mindset that I realized, wow, this is a kind of model that could be across the entire land, where you preserve each different culture, characteristic of different communities, and yet you're all part of one greater whole. Like, so you can be part of one interconnected society, system, economy, and yet without losing your identities. And that seems to be very reminiscent of federal models out there. It's where you don't have to merge into one people, a one-size-fits-all approach, but you also don't separate away from each other, which is becoming, as David said, increasingly impossible to do. And given the benefits that can actually arise from symbiosis, why separate away from each other? Let's live in this land together, let's coexist, and yet not blur away our identities. We actually cherish the identities. Okay.
That was perfect. You hit exactly 12 minutes. I love it. All right. Dr. Block, I'm going to give you 12 minutes to respond.
Give me an 11-minute warning or a 1-minute warning so that I don't go over
Perfect.
my time.
Perfect.
I'm delighted to be part of this discussion. I don't really look upon it as a debate because we're all libertarians. And, the joke about libertarian is you ask 10 of them a question and you get 11 answers. So probably Phil and David don't agree fully with each other. And I probably agree with both of them on many issues. As a libertarian, to me, the key element is justice. Justice, justice, justice. You don't go wrong if you push justice, and the practicality and the utilitarianism and the pragmatism will fall into line if we achieve justice. So what's justice? What's justice is based on property rights. And John Locke is sort of the forefather of libertarian justice theory. And what John Locke says is that property belongs to the first homesteaders. You mix your land with labor, you're the owner of the land. The Jews have been there, 3,500 years ago. There's debate, maybe it's 4,000, maybe it's 3,000, 3,500 years ago. What were they doing? Were they twiddling their thumbs? No, they were homesteading the land. And then they got kicked out, and the Romans kicked them out, and the Ottomans kicked them out, and a bunch of other people kicked them out. It doesn't matter. From the point of view of justice, the Jews are the rightful owners of the land under contention. And how long have the Arabs been there? Oh, 200 or 300 years, for 203 years. Namely, they're Johnny-come-latelys. They are trespassers. We have to incorporate the fact that they're trespassers, that it's unjust for them to be there in the first place. Now, I have no problem with a second state for the Palestinians, just not anywhere in the Middle East. Let them go to any of those countries that are recognizing Palestine. Let them go to Canada. There's plenty of room in Canada. Let them go to Australia. Let them go to Norway. I don't know. I think there are 150 countries that recognize a Palestinian state. By the way, there is no Palestinian state right now, but they recognize it anyway. Let the Palestinians go there because they don't own that land in justice. They are trespassers. Now, what happened in 2005 is that there were a bunch of Jews living in Gaza, and the Israeli government kicked them out. And the idea was to let them have a Palestinian state, sort of. Let them be the Hong Kong of the Middle East. That was the Jewish Israeli hope. And from 2005 to 2007, the PLO and the Hamas were fighting. Hamas won. And from 2007 until now, well, not now, but until maybe 2023, October 7th, there was a Palestinian state. What did they do? Did they build desalination plants? No. Did they build hotels? No. Did they build factories? No. Did they build farms? No. What they built mainly was a tunnel from which to launch suicide bombers and rocket ships. And they put the rocket ships in hospitals. They put the rocket launchers in schools and in residential areas. And they started shooting rockets over to Israel. The Palestinians have got a bad history. At one time, King Hussein welcomed them into his country. And guess what the Palestinians did? They tried to overthrow him. The Palestinians are an interesting type of people. They bite the hand that feeds it. So if we're going to promote justice, yes, we should kick them out because they don't belong there. They're trespassers. What justice means? Look, if you come to my house and I didn't invite you, justice doesn't mean that you and I live together in a Swiss-canton system. It doesn't mean we live together at all. It means that I kick you out because you're a trespasser. So apart from that, I'm a big fan of the Swiss-canton system. Oh, and by the way, I have a constructive criticism for David. The blue and the green are hard to distinguish, so get a different color, either blue or green, and they get pink or some other color because it's hard to see on your very important diagrams. So my idea is if we have to have if we have to have one country for Palestinians or Arabs and Jews together, the Swiss-canton system is very, very good. So I agree with my colleagues, Phil and David there. If we have to have it, that's the way to go because that's the best way to go. I mean, not only did the what was it, the Cato Institute, but also the Fraser Institute, which I started, the Economic Freedom Index, put Switzerland #1, or maybe it was #2 to Hong Kong, I forget. But Switzerland is way up there, always in the top 2 or 3 in terms of economic freedom and liberty. So I have no problem with the canton system. And if push came to shove, we had to stipulate, we had to have one country for the Arabs and the Jews. Sure, the canton system is the best. I'm a big supporter of that. If we have to have it, if we stipulate that we have to have that, then the canton system is the best way to go. Not because I always favor decentralization versus centralization. as a libertarian, the presumption is decentralization is better. Because if you don't like what your city is doing, you go to another city in the same state. If you don't like what's going on in your state, you go to another state. But to go to another country is a real pain in the neck. So decentralization would be the general principle. However, there are exceptions. For example, Ronald Reagan once criticized New York City on rent control. And Ronald Reagan said, well, rent control is no good and we're going to kick New York City butt. Well, now I'm a centralist because I think rent control is an evil. And I think that the federal government was better than the city government, let alone the state government. So I'm not a decentralist per se. Yes, that's the presumption of libertarianism, but it can be defeated. So with that proviso, I would say yes, if we have to have an amalgamation of the two countries, or the two peoples, rather, the Swiss-canton system is the best way to go. So we have no problem on that. The problem I have with my two libertarian colleagues is, should they be there in the first place? Now, David says, well, it's impractical to kick them out. I'm not concerned about practicality. I'm concerned about justice. Look, when we, in 1860 or 1850, one of the arguments against freeing the slaves was it was impractical. And where would they go? What would they do? You'd have to disrupt the whole economy, not just the southern economy. There were slaves in the northern part of the United States. So practicality was against freeing the slaves. Well, we're libertarians. We're not so concerned about practicality. We're concerned about justice. And it was just to eliminate slavery in the U.S., and it's just to kick those people out. Look at how they behaved. I mean, if they behaved nicely in 2005 when the Hamas took over, if they traded with with Israel, if they put in desalination plants, if they put in hospitals, if they put in peaceful things, okay, then, what the heck? So their trespassers will tolerate them. Maybe that would be the moderate view. But they didn't do that. They didn't act like they were deserving of any decency because they were indecent. I mean, suicide bombers, rocket ships. Why do I keep saying rocket ships? Rocket launchers, rockets keep going over eastward from Gaza to Israel, and now we want to give them a partnership in a amalgamated Swiss-canton system. They don't deserve it for two reasons. One, because they're trespassers and they should be kicked out. Two, because look at how they behaved when they had some sort of control. And look at how they behaved to King Hussein. So, if you have to have a Swiss-canton system, let's bring in people from Korea. Let's bring in people from Africa. Let's bring people from God knows where. And let's have a Swiss-canton system for them, but not those Palestinians. One, they don't deserve it because they're trespassers. And two, they don't deserve it because look at what they did. What they did, I had a full head of hair. Look at me now. I'm kidding about that. These people are monsters. And now what's happening, Hamas, not only is Hamas killing Jews, you know who else they're killing? They're killing other Gazans who are trying to abide by Donald Trump's peace platform. And according to Donald Trump's peace platform, which both sides have agreed to, Hamas is supposed to disarm. And instead of disarming, what they do is they get clan leaders from Gaza and they put them on their knees with their hands tied behind their back and they shoot them in the back of the head. These are the kind of people you want to have a canton with? Well, again, if you have to, yes, canton is good. But you don't have to. Justice requires that they be kicked out. And I think I didn't do my full, I guess I did do my 12. You were a rotten kid. You're supposed to stop me at 11 minutes.
You got a minute and 15 seconds left.
Oh, I got a minute and 15 seconds. I object to using the word West Bank. It's Samaria or Judea. West Bank is a concoction. And I also have to correct you, Alex. You said that I was a senior fellow at the Mises Institute. Mm-hmm. I'm not. I've been kicked out of that.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't know that.
I've been kicked out of the Mises Institute, the Ron Paul Institute, the Future of Freedom Foundation, antiwar.com, and Libertarian Foundation. Why? Because I support Israel. And take antiwar.com. Antiwar.com is a wonderful libertarian group. The Mises Institute, LouRockwell.com, mentions freedom and peace. We're not in favor of peace. We're not anti-war. We're only anti-offensive war, but we favor defensive war. We're not pacifists. Now, look, pacifism and libertarianism are compatible. You can be a pacifist and a libertarian in good standing, but it's not required. So we're not anti-war. We are pro-war when it's defensive war. Even Murray Rothbard favored 2 wars.
All right, that is time. I love where we're going with this. What we're going to do for the next 10 minutes is I'm going to give Phil and David 5 minutes of just being able to respond uninterrupted, and then Walter, I'll flip it, give you 5 minutes of uninterrupted conversation, and then we'll go to 30 or 40 minutes of open discussion. Man, you guys have already given me a lot to think about here. I'm writing down notes on my page, so I'm really looking forward to that. But Phil and David, I'm starting a 5-minute timer now. You guys have 5 minutes uninterrupted response.
Great.
You want to start,
David,
Phil?
you want to go first?
I guess I can try to wing it for, I don't know if I can go 5 minutes, but I'll try.
I don't. 5 minutes together, right? So
Yeah, 5 minutes together.
Oh, 5 minutes together. Well, then in that case, I could probably come up with something. One thing I'd like to say, the whole property rights issue. Again, tracing these property titles would be extremely difficult because there's no way to trace it. Because you're talking about collective groups. But even if you could trace it, a lot of Arabs, and there's very good DNA evidence, are descended from Jews. Where do the Palestinian Christians come from? Good evidence is that they come, that their ancestors in many cases, I mean, they have a better claim than just about anyone to be descended from the original apostles, right? So where do they come from? So a lot of the Palestinians were once Christian or once Jewish and converted, right? So dealing with that situation could be very difficult. And again, there's DNA arguments. There's a lot of mixing with Jews as well, and with the European populations. So you're not talking about distinct groups here. I think it's fair to say. Again, I'm wondering if we have a model of success, and that model of success is provided by Israel itself. So the argument that the Palestinians are hopelessly violent and so forth, well, their biological cousins live in Israel. They are 20% of the population. Most of them, but not all of them, are citizens. They can vote, as Walter pointed out, and they live in peace with their neighbors. Now, there's certainly a lot of injustices there. You could argue that there are similarities to the Jim Crow South, especially in the 1950s. However, I think it's a pretty strong success story of 2 groups getting along with each other peacefully. So the argument that the Palestinians are somehow, I don't know if this is genetic or their culture and so forth, they're naturally disposed to violence, is not very convincing. So, I mean, those are a couple thoughts that I had, and I don't know if Phil wants to go on with 2 minutes.
I'm happy to continue. So, I agree. I've learned in this land that nothing is black and white, and no people is a monolith. And so, for example, Walter, you talked about Hamas, and I'm with you 100% about Hamas and Islamic Jihad and any other terrorist groups and whatever. Okay, none of us are trying to defend them. But to assume that all Palestinians are like that, is wrong, in the same way that some people assume that all Jews are all the same. And what I'm saying is, where I live, there are fundamentally different kinds of Jews who do not agree on almost anything. And so when you talked about decentralization, absolutely. it's needed here because even if there were no Arabs here in this land, before October the 7th, this country was on the verge of breaking down into a civil war because of fundamental disagreements between some kinds of Israeli Jews that imagine one future for this country and some others that imagine a completely different future. And so once again, this shows that you need to have different areas with different customs and rules of conduct that suit each other. And there's no reason why the Palestinians or Arabs, whatever we want to call them, okay, cannot be part of that, especially, as I said, that we've actually seen the benefits of the complementariness. Now, obviously, we're not going to lay ourselves open to violence and hand over to the bad guys, let them set the agenda. But to suggest that all the Arabs have no rights here at all, to me, reminds me of what some foreigners say about the settlers, for example. They say the settlers, they shouldn't be there, they have no legitimacy there, they all should go. And my perspective is, look, regardless of whether those settlements should have been established in the first place, they're there now, and there are people who've been born in those settlements, and they deserve to live and stay living where they've lived all their lives. And I would say the same argument with regard to the Arabs that live here. And so,
all right. Well, we're at the 5-minute time there. Walter, 5 minutes, uninterrupted response before general discussion.
Phil, I appreciate your point about the flourishing of the three towns, the two Jewish towns and the Arab town. That's ideal and that's lovely, and I appreciate that. I disagree that there would be there'd be a great disturbance, but I don't care about disturbance. I care about injustice. There was a great disturbance when we freed the slaves. We had a perfectly good system, some people would say, and then it got disturbed. Nothing wrong with disturbing. The argument they were there all their lives, they were trespassers all their lives. Just because they were there all their lives doesn't mean that they have any rights. Look, the slave owners were slave owners all their lives too. So that means that they have a right to keep being a slave owner? No. Just because you've done something all your life doesn't mean it's right. Another point is David says they have entirely legitimate rights. They don't have any legitimate rights at all, let alone entirely legitimate. They're trespassers. David says you can't trace any property. I respectfully disagree. You know, in Canada, the sport is hockey. In the U.S., it's football. In the rest of the world, it's soccer. You know what the great sport is in Israel? Archaeology. They're forever digging. And whenever they dig, the first few feet, they find Arab stuff. Coins, clothing, whatever. But you go a little bit deeper and you find Israeli stuff. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third most important mosque, I think, in all of Islam, is on top of the second temple. And you know what's below the second temple? The first temple. Well, which was there first? Stuff underneath or stuff on top? Obviously, stuff underneath. The Jews were there first. They were there 3,500 years ago. What's this stuff you can't trace? We can trace. Then he says, well, they're all cousins. So what? Cousins, some cousins were there longer than other cousins. Just because they're cousins doesn't mean you can't distinguish. You can't distinguish. They all have common DNA. Well, then who's fighting? I mean, obviously, the IDF is different than Hamas. Yes, they might be first cousins. They might be fifth cousins. I don't know what the relationship is, but that doesn't mean squat. This idea, look, I don't say that they're all evil. Although what happened on October 8th, not October 7th, but on October 8th was they were all dancing in the streets, all of them. Well, maybe a 2-year-old wasn't dancing. He was being held. But they were all dancing in the streets. Look, men are stronger than women, right? Does that mean that there's no woman who's stronger than any man? Men are taller than women. Are there no women who are 6'8"? I'm 5'6". So a woman who's 6'8" is taller than me. Yet it's true as a generalization that men are stronger than women, men weigh more than women, and men are taller than women. So when I say Arabs are evil, I don't mean every last Arab is evil. Obviously, you can point to exceptions, but you can point to exceptions about tall women and women shot putters and women judo and karate experts who are very strong and could kick the butt of most men. That's problematic. Look, I don't say that they're all evil. There are exceptions. I don't say that all women are shorter than all men. There are exceptions. But the Palestinians are not, they're no good nicks. They're not good guys. What happened on October 8th was even more accurate, a more accurate idea of what they are. They were all dancing in the streets. That was horrendous. That was horrible. Look, on what happened on October 7th wasn't good, and I'm not going to deprecate that. That was pure evil. And with people like that, you seriously want to have one country and you want to have a Swiss-canton system? Well, yes, I agree. If you have to, then the Swiss-canton system is the best way to go. But you don't have to. You can have a Palestinian state in the middle of Canada. Canada recognizes it, and there's plenty of empty land in the middle of Canada. Now, this thing about checkpoints. Why do they have checkpoints? Because they have suicide bombers. They want to check them out. I mean, you have that picture of all those people in that bar, one of David's pictures of the people. You have to have checkpoints. Otherwise, there'll be suicide bombers. And the people on Samaria and Judea, so-called West Bank, and the settlers are supposed to be evil. The settlers are a bunch of Jews. The Jews are people of the book. The Jews are a bunch of nerds. The Jews don't initiate war. Jews want to study the Torah or follow Einstein or something like that. The reason that they have guns there is because they keep being attacked by the Arabs.
All right, well, let's take this. I think that's a great place, I think, to start just kind of our general discussion. So I think you guys have all laid out your cases really, really well. There's a lot to talk about here. I think we got about 40 minutes of time where I'm gonna leave it open to you guys just to have a back and forth. You know, as long as we're conscientious of making sure we're balancing our time effectively here. I'm gonna try to talk as little as possible, but I do have a couple of questions that I might interject here in a few minutes for both sides. But since you guys have both presented your case, I would just love to leave this open to you. Where do you guys want to begin the conversation here?
Okay, I'm very happy to begin by responding to a few of Walter's statements. First of all, I'm not a pacifist, and I'm a very firm believer in the need for security. If you do not have security, you lay yourselves open to very bad things happening from bad actors, including obviously Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but there are some bad actors on the Jewish side as well. Okay, some have been taking advantage of the current situation right now in Judea and Samaria, where certain settlers know that they can act with impunity, and they are doing all sorts of things because they believe that all the Arabs don't belong there, and they see them as trespassers, exactly as you described. But you stated that Jews were here first. That's not exactly accurate, because in our Bible, it's recorded that we arrived here and there were Canaanites here. And we even list the names of the Canaanites, including, for example, the Jebusites were the ones who lived in Jerusalem. So none of us were here first, and we don't know exactly who is descended from the Canaanites. The Palestinians attempt to claim that they are descended from the Canaanites. There may be truth in that. There may not. I have no idea. It may well be that we, in many cases, descended from the Canaanites. DNA does suggest that we are very, very similar and interwoven. And so this idea that we are all totally separate peoples and whatever doesn't seem to bear out based on the genetic evidence. But this argument that the Palestinians are trespassers, they don't belong here at all, okay? This is something that is very, very, I find it very hard to suggest that you talk about a 2-year-old baby or whatever. Okay, if a 2-year-old's been born in this land, okay, what's to say that 2-year-old is a trespasser? They haven't done anything, okay? And by the way, in terms of property rights, many Palestinians do have title deeds. It's called a taboo here in Israel. Okay, they have them. Okay, and famously, they also have keys that they preserve to old homes that they had that got wiped out and whatever. They did have property rights under the Ottoman Empire or under the British Mandate or whatever. And so for you to suggest, no, they have no rights at all, seems to be arguing that they're incredibly black and white. And now, as for the celebrations on October the 8th, only some, I can assure you, were doing that. Okay, in this area, there was palpable fear as to what was going to happen. Okay, and there's been massive consequences. So again, we can't say that they're all like this and whatever. So yeah, maybe some do not belong here. Okay, but maybe you could argue that some Jews don't belong here either. You know, it's very hard to really say on that perspective, the legal set. So from a practical point of view, let's try and see, okay, we're all here, and I'm also the chairman of the Abrahamic movement. The Abrahamic movement believes that Abraham is our common ancestor. And so if we all, as we do, claim descent from Abraham, then there's definitely a case to be made that not only the descendants of Isaac belong in this land, why not the descendants of Ishmael as well? And if we can all find a way of getting along and not putting the power in the hands of the bad guys, then you can create something that would really work for everybody. Okay.
Walter, what do you think?
My turn. Okay. I agree with Phil about security. Security is very important. You don't have security, you don't have much of anything.
Correct.
And I think that the Palestinians are not a source of security for Jews. And there's a lot of evidence for that. October 7th, October 8th. We don't have to go to 2023. There were pogroms long before 1948 when the Israeli state started. There was a pogrom of 1928 where hundreds of Jews were just slaughtered. So there's a long history of initiatory violence from the Arabs to the Palestinians or the Arabs to the Jews, and not from the Jews to the Arabs. Yes, I don't think there are any. Are there any bad Jewish actors? Of course, there are some Jewish actors, for goodness sakes. I mean, the IDF has got, 300,000 soldiers, and to think that there's not one of them who is a no-goodnik, of course, there would be some. But in the Samaria and Judea, those settlers are fighting a defensive war, not an offensive war. Bibi Netanyahu once said a magnificent thing. I can't quote it exactly, but I can give the gist. He said, if the Arabs put down their arms, there'd be peace. If the Jews put down their arms, there'd be no more Jews. Let me say that again. If the Arabs put down their arms, there'd be peace. If the Jews put down their arms, there'd be no more Jews. I think that is so true and so undeniable. And now, with regard to the Canaanites, yes, if there were Canaanites before 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago when the Jews were there, and they can make a case that they were there and they were homesteading, then the Jews should leave. The Jews should leave because they're trespassers then. But there are no evidence that there are any Canaanites or any grandchildren of Canaanites. So I'm sticking to my principles. I'm not violating my principles. I'm not saying, well, the Jews can stay, but everyone else has to leave. The first homesteaders have the right, and the Jews are the first homesteaders that we know of for whom there's evidence. The first temple was built a long time ago. Then the second temple was built a long time ago. The archaeological evidence, as I've mentioned, of the Jewish national sport shows that the Jews were there. It doesn't show anything about any Canaanites. Let the Canaanites come present themselves, and let them show some evidence that they were there before the Jews, and then the Jews have got to leave. But it hasn't happened, and I don't think it will happen. Now, you also say, well, the 2-year-old. Well, the 2-year-old is a trespasser. look, if a mother and a father and a 2-year-old come to your house, Phil, and they start living there, they're all trespassers because it's your house. And the 2-year-old is an innocent trespasser. The parents are guilty trespassers, but 2-year-olds can be trespassers by being in a place that they don't belong. Now you say, but the Arabs had title. Of course they had title. They had plenty of title. Interesting what happened in 1948 or 1947. There were 5 armies invading. Syria, Egypt, Iraq, I figure Lebanon. And you know what the Arabs, the generals of these Arab countries said? They said to the Arabs, get out, go away, take a vacation. Why? Because if you stay, we're going to have to protect you. Look, we want to slaughter all the Jews. That's a given. No question about that. But if you're there, you look a little bit like them. You're cousins with them. We have to take extra effort to protect you. So go away. We'll mop them up in 2 weeks, and then you come back, and everything will be hunky-dory. Well, and a lot of them left, and they had titles. They had keys to their actual locks. But those titles were irrelevant. Those titles emanated from the Ottomans, from the British, from the Romans, for all I know. Those titles were invalid. Just because you have a title doesn't mean it's a legitimate title. So yeah, they had titles. Now you talk about the practical point of view. Yes, from a practical point of view, you're probably right. Probably the Swiss-canton system is the best way to go. But I'm not that interested in the practicality. I'm interested in justice. And in the case of justice, I think that they should all leave. Again, not every one of them is innocent. And if they can prove they're innocent, and look, there are 20% of them are right now in Israel. If they can prove some sort of connection with something more than 300 years ago, they should be allowed to stay along with the 20% of Israelis. So when I said they should all leave, I was mistaken. I'm corrected by you. 99% of them should leave. The 1%, if they can demonstrate that they have legitimate title, based on Lockean, Rothbardian, what do you call it, homesteading principles.
All right, David, Phil, you guys want to come in on this?
Yeah, why don't I come in real quickly on this? First of all, I think that the account of what happened in 1947 and 48 is a bit more contested than that description would indicate. Even historians such as Benny Morris say there were examples, many examples of ethnic cleansing by Jews. So there's plenty. If we want to relitigate that, and again, my purpose is not to relitigate these old conflicts. I think we see a lot of that. There's a lot more complicated than that depiction on both sides. Secondly, I'm not just arguing that the Palestinians and Jews are cousins. I'm actually arguing that there's good evidence that many, many Palestinians are descended from, to put it crudely, Jacob, right? That they converted, many of them converted at one time to Christianity. That's where the apostles came from, right? And then many of them in turn converted to Islam. You know, I'm wondering if Walter is going to make an exception for the Palestinian Christians, if in the expulsions, who were once much higher percentage of the population, but that's dwindled because a lot of them became Muslim, and before that, a lot of them were Jews. So people are all mixed up here. I think it's fair to say. Now, one thing I'd like to sort of say that I think is interesting to those that argue that the Palestinians are naturally prone to violence is let's look at the history of Switzerland during the Reformation. I just was stunned by some of this stuff. During the wars of the Reformation, for example, the Habsburg lands lost, per capita, 29% of their population. Similar levels were lost in France. The areas that were bordering Switzerland during that time. You know how many people the Swiss cantons lost? There was violence. There was trouble, less than 1%. Same people, Protestants, Catholics, Italian speakers, German speakers, French people, they acted very differently. So I think if you have the right incentive structure, you can have a situation like you have now in Israel to a great extent, where you have the Arabs, 20% of the population, living peacefully with the Jewish majority, getting along with them, working along with them side by side. These are the that's what I was meant by cousins. They are the biological cousins of the Palestinians. They're relatives, right? You create a different incentive structure. On both sides, you're going to have different behavior. One part of the incentive structure is to give everybody a stake. And that would mean that people in the settlements, for example, who value their Jewish culture and their Jewish heritage and their ties to the land, could declare that their particular canton, say in the middle of the West Bank, it upholds Jewish traditions, is a mini Jewish state. That's what you have in Switzerland. You have official churches. You have cultures that are upheld in the context of religious freedom. You have official languages, but everybody gets along side by side. So you create a new incentive structure and it's going to change. Now, one issue I would say, and Walter and I may agree, is we need massive privatization in Israel. 93% of the land in Israel is owned by the government. That would be a great opportunity to integrate in the Palestinian population, to transfer much of that government-owned land to them, to privatize it, which is certainly better than the status quo. Maybe Walter would disagree with that, but we're not going in the direction of privatization otherwise. So those are just a few thoughts that and again, the big problem in 1948 was partition. You created a Jewish state which was almost 50% Arab, almost 50%. If Walter thinks that's sustainable, I got a bridge to sell him. That was not sustainable. That was going to lead to trouble. And instead, we had proposals made by Judah ben Magnus and Zionists and Islamic countries proposed Muslim countries proposed this in the UN, voted for it, to have cantonization. That would have avoided that kind of conflict. But you're setting up trouble when you say one size fits all for Jews, who are very different from each other, one size fits all for Muslims or for Arabs, who are very different from each other. And that is the root of the problem. Fortunately, maybe we can overcome that history, but it's going to be difficult because of those decisions that were made in 1947 when the UN did its original partition, creating a Jewish state that was nearly 50% Arab. So that's all I got to say on that.
My comment with regard to Benny Morris, he's one of the people that is called the New Historians. I have a book co-authored with Alan Fuderman, a classical liberal case in favor of Israel, and we ripped them apart. Namely, there is, as David correctly says, there are two sides to this, and historians disagree. And Alan Fuderman and I take one position, and Benny Morris and the other new historians take the other side. Would there be exceptions? Yes, if you can prove that you or your ancestors were there. I don't care if you're a communist or whatever you are. If you can prove it and you're now an Islam follower or a Christian, sure. And there would be some exceptions. Look, that 20% of the Arabs in Israel, they are doctors, they are lawyers, they are policemen, they are members of the IDF. Israel Defense Force. They are professors. They're judges. They're treated very well. By the way, the way to tell whether you're being treated or not is not by a survey, it's by migration patterns. Do those Arabs want to leave Israel? No. Arabs want to come in Israel and be part of Israel because they are treated better in Israel than they are treated in the Arab countries. My favorite group in this is Queers for Palestine. Queers for gays for Palestine. Can you imagine that? If a gay were to go to Gaza, they'd be killed, and yet they favor Palestine. I mean, this is Meshuggah. This is crazy. I agree that they're mixed up. David says they're mixed up, but then he says they're all mixed up. And I think there's a slip between the cup and the lip, between mixed up, yes, and all mixed up. They're not all mixed up. There are distinctions. Look, there are two sides fighting. They can tell the difference between each other. The Hamas people might be third cousins of the Israelis, but they're fighting the Israelis. The Israelis might be third cousins of the Hamas people, but they're fighting. So to say that they're all mixed up and you can't make any distinctions whatsoever, I think is problematic. Now, look, I never said that DNA, that somehow all the Palestinians are necessarily genetically disposed to violence. I never said that. If I said anything like that, I now call it back. What I meant was look at the past history. Not the past history 500 years ago, but the past history in 1928, there was a pogrom. 1947, there was a slaughter of Jews. 2023, there was a monstrosity, perhaps next to the Holocaust, the worst case of atrocity against the Jews ever created. So I'm not saying that they're all necessarily DNA, that they have no free will. And you're quite right, David. As fellow economists, we know that if you change the situation, the change of the rules, demand curves slope downward and supply curves slope upward. And when you change the rules of the game, you get changes. I don't deny that. I affirm that. I agree with you on that. But to say that, but to deny that their past history vis-a-vis Jews is violent, I think is wrong. So I don't say necessarily DNA violent, but I do say violent. They have free will, that they can change, and under the right conditions, they will change. Maybe if we set up Palestine in the middle of Australia. Australia is big in recognizing Palestinian. Let them go to Australia, and probably they will behave better. Maybe they'll behave better. I'm not sure because of their past history with King Hussein, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Now, with regard to privatization, I happen to have 4 books out on privatization. One, why we should privatize everything. My motto is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. And I make the case for that in one book. And then I make the case for privatization of highways and roads and streets, mainly because there are 40,000 people dying on government roads. And if we privatize it, we'd have many fewer deaths. My third book in this series is privatizing oceans, rivers, and lakes. And my fourth is privatizing space, the moon, the Mars. So I agree with you entirely. We should privatize everything. Israel owns, the government owns 96, 97% of the territory. Obviously, it should be privatized. But then you take one more step and you say, well, then let the Palestinians be there. Let the Arabs be there. No, these people they ought to be put in jail if they're put anywhere because of their crimes. So in full justice, they would be executed. They wouldn't be evicted. They'd be executed because they're murderers. Not all of them, but many of them. The problem with Israel is they've only executed one person. What was his name? Eichmann, right. Right now, Ben-Gvir is trying to have the death penalty put on the books. And I think, and what really ticks me off even more about Israel is they keep releasing prisoners. In the latest thing, they got, 20 hostages, and they released about 1,000 prisoners. I can't understand that. That's just so crazy because those 1,000 prisoners are now part of Hamas. So, that's just crazy. So I agree with David. Yes, privatization. We libertarians aren't real big government fans. We believe in private property. But to go from privatization to putting the Arabs in there, I can't go along with. Now, with regard to the 50% in the UN plan, I'm not committed to defending what the UN does. I'm not a big fan of the UN. The UN, had twice as many complaints about Israel as all the complaints about all the other countries in the world. And there is massive slaughter in Africa. The way the Chinese are treating the Uyghurs is preposterous. There's mass murder all over the place, and somehow only Israel is objected to. Well, not only Israel, but Israel is objected to twice as much as all other countries in the world. So I'm not committed to what the UN did. I think that the UN should have given Israel more of the territory, not less of it. And it doesn't matter that there were 50% of the people there. They shouldn't have been there in the first place because they were trespassers. So the idea that just because they're there, they somehow belong there is I find a problem with that.
All right, Phil, David.
Okay, I'd like to respond. Yeah, first of all, you're absolutely right about the fact that Arabs do want to live in Israel, and the ones that have Israeli citizenship are very happy. And it shows that when they are happy, they do become the vast majority law-abiding. And also, you said that when conditions are changed that create positive incentives, that's exactly what happened in this area. The Palestinian town that I mentioned, the traditional Muslim town, it's named Hussan, and it was infamous during the Intifadas as being one of the most violent, hostile Palestinian towns. And they've changed because we created incentives, and now they do not want to go back to the bad old days when they were punished all the time, with reason. Okay, because they were being incredibly violent. Okay, and then by the way, I could just say, they then, after they got punished really badly by the army, they hoped that they would get some kind of prize from the Palestinian Authority for having been this symbol of resistance, and they got nothing. And they realized the money that flows into Ramallah stays in Ramallah, and those leaders only care about themselves and whatever. And then they realized, hey, we totally shot ourselves in the foot. And so then they opened up to start having positive relations with their Israeli neighbors instead. And now their life is so much better. And so, and I will mention that in that town, there are 4 chamulas, as it's called, 4 big families. And one of them is called the Sabbatin family. And that means Sabbath keeper. So they were Jews not that long ago who did indeed convert to Islam. And if one of your criteria, it seems to be, you were talking about ancestry is really important, then Samaria is named after the Samaritans. Okay, and the Samaritans were a huge number of people. The 10 lost tribes, okay, were the Samaritans, but a few of them actually survived. So if you go to Mount Gerizim, you can actually meet a few. There's about 1,000 or 2,000 left. Okay, and they say they're descended from Joseph. Okay, and the tribe of Ephraim, and some of them, the priests, are descended from the tribe of Levi, because the Levites were the high priests. And but here's the interesting thing: the Samaritans weren't wiped out. Okay, they got converted, and so the city of Nablus, a very large Palestinian city, the majority of people there, they were Samaritans once. So if we're going to look at the ancestral rights, then there are a hell of a lot of people in this land that are now Palestinian Arabs, okay, but they were members of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so this is another reason, to suggest they're all trespassers and whatever. It's way, way more complicated than that. And so rather than try and work out, well, which one's got ancestry and exactly what, it's very complex. Much better is to simply start recognizing, okay, people who've been living here and are not doing something bad and are not invading anybody else's land, but are just carrying on living in the places where their parents and grandparents have lived, they belong. And to suggest that they're trespassers just because you believe, possibly falsely, that they're not descended from Jacob, I find that a difficult argument. And I would rather create good conditions that we can all live in this entire land. I agree with what David said right at the beginning. This land it's one land. Okay, Jews call it Israel, Arabs call it Palestine, but it's one land. And the story of King Solomon and the baby is an example of where, if you truly love the baby, the mother who truly loved the baby didn't want the baby cut in half. Same applies here. We need to share this land, but that doesn't mean you have to kick anybody out. You can do it, and you can preserve security, and you can create prosperity, and Switzerland is a shining light that we could emulate. And so that's what we believe.
Yeah, and before you come back in, Walter, one of the things that I was thinking as you were talking earlier, and I'm genuinely curious about your response to this, is that there are a lot of leftists in the United States that make the claim, which I think as a libertarian is kind of true, that the Europeans came to North America and we kicked the Native Americans off of their land, and now we're living on their land. And so I just think, like, with the argument that you're making about the Palestinians right now, how does that correspond to that conversation? Okay, so like I live in Kentucky. Does a descendant of the Native American tribe have the right to kick me out of my house because technically they were here before the Europeans were? I just feel like there's kind of some parallels between that. I'd love for you to address all of those things.
Well, let me begin. I support Phil when he says that incentives are important, and that when you make the rules of the game for Arabs more accessible, more gentle, more nice, they will behave much better. I mean, David and I are economists. We know that when the price rises, the amount supplied increases. When the price rises, the demand decreases. And when the price falls, the supply decreases and the demand increases. So I couldn't agree with you more. Incentives matter. I won't say that only incentives matter, but I'll go close. Perhaps only incentives matter. Not quite, but we're getting close. But that's a positive statement. Now, in economics, we distinguish between the normative and the positive. For example, it's a positive statement to say that the minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers. It's also a positive statement to deny it, that the minimum wage law does not create unemployment for unskilled workers. It's still a positive statement. I think it's wrong, but it's a positive scientific statement trying to say what causes what. And in that realm, I agree with Phil. If you improve the incentives for the Arab people, they will behave better. Who could disagree with that? I mean, no economist could disagree. If you disagree, they'll take away your PhD, or they should anyway. But we're not only talking positive, we're also talking normative. Normative has got nothing to do with incentives. Normative has got to do with justice. And if it's true that the Jews were there first, and the other guys came later and are trespassers, well, then we look at it very differently. Now you say, well, they can't all be trespassers. There were the Sumerians. And I've already agreed on that. I said, look, we make an exception for the Christians who can prove that they were descended from the Jews. We make an exception for the Islamicists, the Muslims, who can do that. The burden of proof is on them. Let them show up in an Israeli court and say, look, I'm a Canaanite or I'm a whatever-ite, and they would be accepted in my view. So I agree that there are exceptions. We disagree as to how many. You think it's 80% of them, maybe. I think it's maybe 20%. I'm not sure about the number, but they haven't come forth. They haven't acknowledged the libertarian principle of succession, not secession, and initial homesteading. Now, you talk about, let me talk about the Indians. The claim is that if we extrapolate from what I'm saying in the Middle East and we apply it to the United States, we white people should all get out. I'm putting words in Alex's mouth, but that's the gist of what he's saying. And there is some sense in that. Namely, they were there first. We Europeans and Jews, we got there in I don't know when, 1492 with Columbus, 1607. I don't know when we got there. But when we got there, there were many, many native people. They were there first. Right now in the U.S., there are 360 million people, give or take. And the place is empty, empty. You go from Boston to L.A., and you look out of the window at night, and you'll see a light here and a light there, and there's a light. West of the Mississippi, you're not going to see any lights. Yes, there'll be Denver, there'll be Las Vegas, there'll be Dallas, and that's it. The place is empty, empty. How many native people were there in the country when the white man came? The best estimate is 3 million. It varies from 1 million to 6 million, or I'm not sure how many there were there, but 3 or 4 million, something like that. And now there's 260 million and it's empty. So how much could they have homesteaded? And by the way, they weren't that big in the homesteading. They did have some agriculture, which is homesteading, but they were more nomadic. They would go from here to there. They would have a mile square, a bunch of teepees here, and then they'd go up north in the summer and then go back down the south. So they owned a square mile here and a square mile there and the path between them. And they also hunted. And so it might not be 1 square mile. It might be 10 square miles, because the less intensive, the less land you can claim under homesteading. Murray Rothbard once said that a family of 4 east of the Mississippi could claim 160 acres. Where did he get that? Well, he figured a family of 4 east of the Mississippi, 160 acres could keep them going happily. West of the Mississippi, he said 1,600. Why not 1590 or 1602 or something? Well, that's you get that problem with the continuum. What's the statutory rape age? We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, even if she agrees, you're a statutory rapist, because we don't think 5-year-old girls can agree to any such thing. You go to bed with a 25-year-old woman and she agrees, you're not a rapist. Well, where do you draw the line? 16, 17, 19, 18, I don't know, somewhere around there. Well, it's the same thing with homesteading. How much land do you get for homesteading in a relatively fertile area east of the Mississippi? How much west of Mississippi? How much land will you get on the moon? And that's one of the things that I discuss in my book about privatizing the moon. So the answer to your question, Alex, is yes, they would have property. Very, very little. Extremely little. They would have something like 1%, given that it's 3 million over 300 million. I think we have 360 million people now, and let's say we had 3.6 million. So they get 1% at most, because they didn't homestead as well as they should have, because a lot of it was mobile. So maybe 0.75% of the land of the U.S. should be given to them. Now, there were treaties. The Indians were given a treaty here, and then they found gold and they kicked them out. That's not kosher. That's not libertarian. But to answer your question, what it is an attempt to reductio ad absurdum of my view. And I appreciate that. And I thank you for it. I should have mentioned it myself, and I thank you for mentioning it. So what I'm saying is that the reductio ad absurdum of my view, that the land belongs to the Jews and their descendants, cannot be applied to the U.S., and then we all have to leave. 1% of us have to leave. And the court would decide that they would have to demonstrate this. And, there is such a thing as a statute of limitations. What's a statute of limitations? The statute of limitations is that, look, I now steal this watch from Phil, and I give it to my son. And 30 years later, Phil's son comes along and says, hey, my son's name is Matthew. And Phil's son says, Matthew, give that watch back to me because it was my father's. And let's say it's a picture of Phil right on the back of this watch. So there's no question that this is Phil's watch. Mm-hmm. Well, in justice, my son should give his son this watch. End of case. What a statute of limitations says is, well, it's 30 years, and we've decided that after 30 years, all bets are off. Well, I think that a statute of limitations like that is unjust. I think if it's 100 years and it's not my son and Phil's son, but it's great-grandsons, my great-grandson should give his great-grandson that watch in 1,000 years from now. I don't believe in any legal statute or any legislated statute of limitation. However, there is a thing called a natural statute of limitations. What's a natural statute of limitations? The natural statute of limitations is that the presumption is that the owner of the watch or the holder of the watch is the rightful owner. That's the presumption. So it would be up to Phil's son to go to court and say, hey, that's my dad's watch. Make Matthew give it to me. The burden of proof is on he who would overturn extant property titles. Well, the problem with the Indians is that they didn't have any, paper. They didn't have any titles. They didn't have anything that you could grab onto and say, look, here's a Bible. And in this Bible, look over here, and you could see something written. They don't have that. So they'd be in a very poor position. How about the Israelis? Do they have anything? Oh, yes. Oh, boy, do they have stuff. The first temple is under the second temple, and the second temple is under the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's irrefutable evidence that they were there first. And then all this evidence of the digging, archaeology, not archaeology. What is it called when you dig stuff? No, archaeology? Yeah, archaeology. I'm getting senile. I can't think of words that well. I think it's archaeology. You go down there, and as I said, the first couple of feet, you'll find Arab stuff. You go down deeper, you'll find Jewish stuff. You go down even deeper, you won't find any Canaanite stuff. So I think that this reductio ad absurdum is wrong, and I think that the burden of proof on the Jews that want to overturn the Arab title is very, very good. Whereas I think that the burden of proof that the Indians, the native peoples, would have to put forth is very, very weak. So I think that's an excellent objection, but I think I did it.
Yeah, I want to open this back up to Phil and David. I see Phil has his hand up, so I'll let you go first, Phil. But then I want to kind of put that question to David. In the Canton system, how would it deal with the property rights issue? But Phil, since you got your hand up, I'll let you go first here, and then we'll go over to David and let him respond.
Yeah. So just very quickly, you said you don't find Canaanite stuff. You do. Okay. The city of Jericho has got archaeological history that dates back almost 10,000 years, long before the children of Israel arrived. There's plenty of archaeological stuff of people that were here before us. Okay, and you mentioned that the American Indians don't have any paper deeds to demonstrate, but I've got to say, my view, the fact that they don't have any deeds wouldn't, in my view, necessarily declare, therefore they don't have any rights. And just because they were nomadic and they never settled down and homesteaded, they had no rights to carry on. I wouldn't personally agree with that. But anyway, we can leave that to the side. The important point is the Palestinians do have title deeds. And so, if we're saying the burden of proof is having a title deed, well, they got it. Yeah, they've got a lot of legitimate claims for being here. And so just declaring them all as trespassers, I find very problematic.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah. And again, let's even say that let's leave aside the property issue. I mean, there are plenty of people who live in the United States, plenty of immigrants, who own no property, right? And they bought property, and people chose to rent to them. So presumably, in an interdependent society, you're going to find a lot of Israeli businessmen and others who want to hire Arabs, who want to rent to them. So what? They don't have property, right? I mean, why should they be kicked out simply because they don't own some real estate? That doesn't really make sense to me. Let me just sort of bring up another issue, if I can, real quickly. I would argue the word libertarian has been thrown around here a lot, but I think libertarians and classical liberals really have a lot to say on this issue. Conservatives have a lot to say. There's a conservative organization called the Federalist Society. What Phil is proposing is federalism, for God's sakes. And I can't get the conservative federalists interested in this, even to talk about it. So I think that I think classical liberals are in a very unique position to take a leading role on this, to say something new, because we do have a dilemma here. And the dilemma is that the facts on the ground are pointing against a two-state solution. It's just not possible. I mean, I guess if we go with Walter and we expel a bunch of people, but I think even there, that's going to be very difficult to decide who you're going to expel and who you're not going to expel. As Phil was pointing out, there's evidence that Palestinians, Muslims, had Jewish ancestry. So that's going to be very difficult. even if you do that. But a two-state solution, some sort of expulsion, some sort of muddling along, which is what you're doing now, which is a status quo of de facto rule by the Israelis over Judea and Samaria, whatever you want to call it, over all of these territories, but disfranchising the local population. In the modern world, that is not sustainable. That is not sustainable to have a vast disfranchised population. So what's the choice? Well, the natural fear is that if we, from a lot of people in Israel, is we enfranchise the Palestinians to vote for the Knesset like their cousins do currently, their Arab cousins, let them vote for the Knesset. I've made that argument many times. That is a just solution. However, there is some real legitimate fears that people have that could lead to tyranny by one group, even though Jews would still be a majority, smaller one, but a majority. And so what a canton solution does is it addresses that problem. It gives everybody a stake. It's a win-win solution. It gives settlers a stake. It gives Muslims a stake. Druze, they might have their own cantons. Christians. And you may break down over time these divisions. Switzerland has become a fairly secular society in a lot of ways, even though it has official churches and so forth for the cantons, because that led to a tradition of tolerance, where Switzerland was not immune from the Reformation, but because you have internal free trade, internal interaction, you have kind of a rule by consensus in a lot of ways. Over time, has broken down a lot of these suspicions and created a much more of a secular society than it used to be, and a much more tolerant society than it used to be in many ways.
Let me reply to both Phil and David. First, Phil. He says there was Canaanite stuff way down there. There was probably also dinosaur stuff way down there. If you dig deep, you're going to get a dinosaur. And you're not giving the children of dinosaurs anything. The hell with those dinosaurs?
No, great. But we're talking about people.
Well, Phil is making a reasonable point. The problem is connecting whatever is below the Israeli stuff from 4,000 years ago to go 6, 8, 10,000 years ago. Where are the Canaanites? If there are any, let them step up, in my view, and let them get what they justifiably own. And if it's the whole thing, they get the whole thing. But the burden of proof is on them, because the Israelis are in charge right now. It's true the Arabs are in charge of some things, but I think the Jewish have met their burden. But the Canaanites have not met any burdens. So too bad on the Canaanites. It's interesting what's happening in Canada now, to get back to Alex's point. What's happening in Canada now is that the tribes are going to the court and they're saying, hey, we own the whole kit and caboodle. And the court is saying, well, where's your evidence? And they say, well, we don't have any written evidence. We don't have anything like that. But our grandfather remembers that we used to hunt and fish over here. And the courts are going along with that. And so it's interesting what's going on with this land acknowledgement. I do competitive race walking. I do half marathon, 5K. And a lot of times when they have these races, they have a land acknowledgement. We thank the XYZ native tribe for letting us use this land. A lot of universities are now having, land acknowledgements. And they're saying, we thank the XYZ tribe for letting us have our campus right here. The answer is, look, if you think they own it, get out. Who the hell are you to trespass on their land? I mean, it's a logical contradiction to have a land acknowledgement and then not leave. If you believe that those people were the rightful owners, you shouldn't be there in the first place. So these leftists are just very hypocritical. They don't understand things. Now, you mentioned, well, suppose a Jew wants to employ an Arab, or suppose he wants to hire an Arab or rent his house to an Arab. Fine. He should be responsible for any crime that Arab commits. Look, I'm an open borders person. I believe in open borders. I think that's the proper libertarian position. However, there are murderers and rapists out there who would like to come to the U.S. or to Israel. We got to stop them somehow. We just can't let them all in. Now, my solution is to privatize every square inch of the country, the water, the land, everything, no exceptions. See, look, right now, suppose a Martian comes to middle of Alaska or the middle of Wyoming, and he starts homesteading. And ICE, the group in charge of stopping immigration, illegal immigration, comes up to him and says, I'm sorry, you'll have to leave. And he says to them, well, what libertarian rule am I violating? And there is no libertarian rule he's violating, because that land has never been homesteaded before. It's virgin land by definition, and never human feet have touched it. So he has a right to stay there. And but not if every bit of land is privatized. Now, the problem here is that there's such a thing called sub-marginal land that wouldn't be homesteaded because it's in the middle of Alaska, the middle of Wyoming, and the middle of the Rocky Mountains, and nobody wants it. Well, you better use some charity or something, according to my theory, and homestead it, because otherwise the Martians or the Chinese or the Arabs can come in there. Now, Israel is small enough that they can privatize every square inch of the place, and no one should be allowed in there unless by invitation. But now we don't want people to start inviting a bunch of criminals, because if they do, then they are responsible for it. Now, the objection to this, the supposed refutation of this theory is, well, what about parents and children? The children are born and then they become a Hitler. Are the parents responsible for Hitler? No. But there's a disanalogy between inviting somebody and having a baby. If you have a baby, you don't know if they're going to turn out to a saint or a murderer. But if you invite somebody, you should know who you're inviting, and you should be responsible. So that would be my answer to that one. Now, the Federalists, I agree with David and Phil. The Federalists are wrong. Again, I favor the Swiss-canton system. We have no dispute here. I'm a fan. Sign me up. And I say again that if you have to have a country with Arabs and Jews in there, stipulate, arguendo, that you have to, well, then the Swiss-canton system is the best by far of any other system. So we have no disagreement there. But when you say it's non-sustainable to kick them all out, it was non-sustainable to free the slaves. It created havoc, economic havoc, to free those slaves. Should we not have done it because it was non-sustainable, because it was very difficult? That's another quote I forget from which of my colleagues here. Just because it's very difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Look, what we now have is very difficult. People are being slaughtered on both sides. What is it? 80,000 people, Arab people, Gazan people have been killed. So I don't know if those numbers are correct. That's what Hamas says. You have to take everything they say with a grain of salt. But whose fault are those deaths? The deaths of those fault. Sorry, the fault for those deaths is Hamas. Yep. Because Hamas. Let me illustrate something for you.
we agree on that. Totally with you. Hamas have used them as cannon fodder and human shields. And
I have two people here. These are my children. And I put them on my chest. And now I have a knife. Here's my knife. And I'm going to kill you, you kikes, you Jews, you rotten people. And you have a gun. You're more strong than I am. You're Israel. I'm Hamas. And you have two choices. One, you shoot me right here and my children die. The other is you let me kill you and your children are right behind you. The Hamas is responsible for all those deaths, and I think we all agree on that. But I have to illustrate this. I mean, David illustrated his thing with a map. I have to illustrate it with my two children here. These deaths are regrettable, but they are the fault of Hamas.
Yes. Yeah. No question. And people who do bad things, and Hamas have done horrific things, worse things to their own people than all the horrific things that they've done to the Jews. Absolutely need to be punished, and they deserve to be kicked out. Absolutely. I mean, they have no desire to live in peace, so they do not form part of anyone who suggests, let's just be sweet and nice to them, and they'll forget that. They don't want that. However, Okay, to suggest or think that all of the Palestinians are like that and that all of them are trespassers and none of them have rights and whatever, I think is problematic. And secondly, if they've never done anything bad, okay, then I think justice suggests that they should be allowed to be here and encouraged to be part of a vibrant, diverse, functioning society with security, with strong peace, okay, but in a way that we preserve all our identities. So I'm very glad that we all agree on, if there were to be a one-state solution, then it should be federal and with different regions. So we're all on the same page on that. So the only thing we're really discussing is who should be able to be part of it.
Well, look, I say just because you've done nothing bad doesn't mean that you have nothing really bad except trespassing, doesn't mean that you have a right to be there. Look, I'm now going to come to your house. I'm going to sit in your living room. I'm not doing anything bad. I'm not hurting you, but you have a right to kick me out of your house.
Yeah, but Walter, my Norwegians ancestors came to the United States. They didn't have any land at all. And they purchased land, they homesteaded land. But, you know, if they'd have gone into work in urban occupations and just rented, you know, I think most Americans would say they just have as much right to be here as anybody else. And I also think that it's fair to say that, you may disagree with me, that the whole Hamas thing is more complicated in one sense, and that Israel was playing games there, is supporting Hamas as a way to undermine the more secular PLO. And, you know, there's good evidence for this, that they were playing games with this. So there's kind of, again, it goes back to, rather than focusing on immediate grievances, or as or Robert Higgs says, eliminating or cutting away the antecedents, we need to look at the antecedents. And part of the antecedents here is the incentive structure. And we have a messed up incentive structure that was created by the decision of the UN, backed by the Truman administration, despite opposition within the Truman administration, to support partition, a cookie cutter system that has produced disastrous results and has produced a screwed up incentive structure. I think Jews and Palestinians are really not that different in responding to incentives. And again, I'm going back to the argument you're making about homesteading. Let's assume you're right about that. That doesn't justify expelling them from the country, because we have all sorts of propertyless people in this country, including many of the more prosperous immigrants came here and thrived in urban occupations and rented their houses. So, and again, the whole idea about making landlords responsible for crimes, I think this is a very bad idea. You know, if I rent a room to somebody, you know, let's say I check them out, right? But let's say they go off and they murder a bunch of people. I shouldn't be held responsible for that. If that person is my employee, you know, are we going to apply that same rule to everybody? I think that would be, to be just, you'd have to do it. And I think you'd be asking for you get a lot of rebellion on that. Let's put it this way. You know, where you're gonna make employers responsible for crimes of employees and that kind of thing.
Well, let me jump in here, gentlemen. We've been going for an hour and a half, and you guys have done a great job, I think, of staking out your positions. And so, to kind of bring this to a close, I want to stick with David and Phil, and then Walter, I'll give you the final word since you were the one that spoke second at the beginning of the show. But my question, and I really want to start with you, David, as I've been thinking about the Swiss-canton model over the last month and a half, as we've been planning this, it is it sounds like such a brilliant solution to this problem from my mind. But, as I think all three of you have highlighted, there is a lot of bad blood and animosity between all of the parties that are involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict right now. So I want to, as we start to bring this to a close, pose this to you guys, David and Phil. How could we actually go about implementing the Swiss-canton model? And do you think it would be successful, given that there would probably be a lot of popular opposition to that? So what are the mechanics behind that? And then Walter, I'll after they've answered their question, I'll come back to you and I'm going to ask you about the prospects for peace in the Middle East as well. But Phil, David, I want to open this kind of final question up to you. How would we go about implementing the Swiss-canton model in Israel-Palestine, and would people accept it, or how would we get them to accept it?
Go ahead, Phil.
Okay, by all means. Okay, so we're very pragmatic here in this land, and we're dealing with very real issues, dangers, okay, that we certainly do not want to in any way open ourselves up to handing control over to the bad guys who are going to do bad things to us. So I talked about strong peace, and I talked about creating the right incentives so that everybody benefits. The federal solution is a win-win. That's what it's designed to be. So we're not talking about taking leaps of faith. Okay, no one needs to give up on where they live or whatever. Nobody needs to be removed from. The settlers were removed from Gaza. No one needs to move anywhere. Okay, but we do it in an incremental fashion. Okay, by creating, I view where I live as a prototype that's actually happening. You couldn't call it already federalism. The government structure hasn't been changed yet, but in terms of the dynamics that we're living on a day-to-day basis, that's how you implement it. And decentralization is something that would appeal to many Israelis. The city of Haifa apparently is well known to have had enough of constantly being dictated to by Jerusalem. Okay, this is a very centralized country. So there are different regions that really want to have autonomy, and so this is the way you move the dial and you make it start happening. It's got to be done in a way that is constantly improving our quality of life, and this land could be an amazing place if we had peace here. Okay, the tourism that would be, which has been destroyed in recent years, would be beyond belief. And if we were part of the Middle East properly, the peace dividend would be huge. So how do you implement it? You implement it in a way that is strong. I use the word strong peace with an excellent, prosperous peace dividend. And then, you move past the incentives for people doing conflict. Now, by the way, I will say there are some diehard people out there. It doesn't matter what you do; they're still going to want to be doing bad things. We have to sideline them, control them. If we need to kick them out, the really bad ones, okay. The bad apples, they need to go. Okay, but the most important thing is that you empower the vast majority of the people who actually just want to live normal lives. And I can tell you, the Palestinians, I've been all over. I'm going to use the name Judea and Samaria. Okay, I've been all over it, and I've met Palestinians. They are human beings, okay, that just want to be able to live in their land, in their homes, okay, and with dignity, and they don't give a damn about the politics. They say 1 state, 2 states, 10 states, we don't care, just as long as we can put food on the table for our families. And those are the people you want to actually bring on board. And that, I'm happy to report, they are the vast majority.
Well, David, before I kick it over to Walter for the final word here, do you have anything to follow up on that?
Yeah, just the answer your question about the bad blood issue. We have plenty of counter examples. Bosnia, for example, right? Last 30 years. Rwanda, last 20, 30 years. Northern Ireland. Those are places that have become pretty peaceful places. You could say maybe Azerbaijan and Armenia is heading in that direction. And we could look at Switzerland. itself, which had religious conflict. And, we're talking about bad blood wiping out 29% of the population in the neighboring countries. That is bad blood. That makes what's going on in Gaza seem rather trivial by comparison. And you add some trouble in Switzerland itself. But those peoples, the Protestants, the Catholics, Germans, French, they were able to create a successful experiment. When Europe was still killing each other, they were coming up with solutions, reconciling with each other during the wars of the Reformation. They settled it pretty quickly. Usually actually kind of provided a model for the Peace of Augsburg and the Peace of Westphalia, in a sense. Not a libertarian paradise by any means, but certainly very successful in a pragmatic sense. Incremental. Let's get the word about this. And this is something that classical liberals can take the lead on. Let's get this debated. Finally, we're getting a debate about it. Let's get other debates. Phil and I could take on advocates of the two-state solution. We could take on secular Palestinian advocates of a one-state solution. We want to have discussion. Let's get this out there. And this is how these things begin. This is how intellectual political revolutions begin. 20 years, 30 years, maybe a lot sooner than that. If this gets on the table, because we've got one thing going for us, Phil and I do. And the Federal Forum, it's not just me, it's the Federal Forum, which has Christians, Druze, it has diverse membership. These are people on the ground in Israel, but the facts there, they recognize that the facts are crying out for some solution that this addresses and that nobody else really can address. Two-state solution. What's the problem with that? Well, where do you have the borders? You can call for a two-state solution, but where are the borders going to be? Nobody can tell you, right? They suddenly run off. And other solutions that have been proposed. This one has something literally for everybody, of people of goodwill anyway.
All right. Well, Phil, David, that was a great summary. Walter, I'm going to leave it over to you for the final word. Prospects for peace in Israel-Palestine. What do you think?
Well, I really wanted to say some other stuff. I don't think that the prospects for peace are very good until Israel annihilates Hamas, and then there'll be peace. But I really wanted to say a few other things beside that. First of all, this Hamas PLO. Yes, David is right. Netanyahu did support Hamas in the past. Why? Because he didn't want to support PLO. He thought if PLO was in the ascendancy, there'd be a two-state solution. And he thought more people would die, more Israelis would die from the PLO than from Hamas. Now, he might have made a mistake. I don't know. We don't know what the contrary to fact conditional is. It's entirely possible that Hamas only killed a stinking lousy 1,200, 1,300 people. And if PLO was part of the two-state solution, more would have died. So it's entirely possible he was right in doing it. He might have been wrong. But what he was doing was an attempt to save Jewish lives. I think I didn't make my point clear about landlords and employers being responsible for employees. Look, Cuba emptied its jails. Venezuela emptied its jails. The people came up through Central America, through Mexico, and under Biden and Obama, millions of them were allowed in the country. What Donald is trying to do is to stop this. One reason is about drugs, but I don't want to get into that because I favor legalization of drugs, all of them. The other reason, he wants to keep murderers and rapists out. Now, look, in California, there are growers who go down to Mexico with a bus, with 5 buses, and they take about 300 people up into California. They go right through Donald's, border. Now, suppose one of them or two of them are mass murderers or murderers. Are you going to tell me that they're not responsible at all for those deaths? I think they are. So I'm not saying that every landlord should be responsible for every tenant. I'm not saying that every employer should be responsible for every employee, but I am saying that if you overcome the national border that Donald Trump is putting in order to keep murderers out, and you bring murderers in, oh yeah, you're responsible. Now, Phil says the bad apples need to go. But for him, a trespasser is not a bad apple. I find that problematic. He says, well, there are people who just want to live a normal life and they should stay. But if they're trespassers, they are not good apples. They are not really bad apples. Trespassing isn't like murder or rape, but still, it's not kosher. It's not legal to be a trespasser. I now want to devote a few minutes to talking about this general discussion. I have been excommunicated. I have been canceled by the Mises Institute, the Ron Paul Institute, the Future of Freedom Foundation, antiwar.com, and the Libertarian Institute that I know of. Other libertarian groups might have done it, but they didn't tell me that I'm no longer associated with them. I very much appreciate the three of you for not excommunicating me, for not canceling me, for engaging, as David was talking about, intellectuals. This is what intellectuals do. We sit around and talk and try to get 1/1,000,000th of an inch closer to the proverbial truth with a capital T. We don't always succeed, but we do our best. The challenge of Israel, Palestine, or the challenge of COVID, or the challenge of anything can only be met, as John Stuart Mill says in his book on liberty, by discussing, by dialogue. Not by, you disagree with me, Phil, you disagree with me, I'm never going to speak to you again. That's not intellectual. Now, it's perfectly libertarian. We believe in free association. Nobody should be compelled to speak to anyone else. If these 5 groups don't want to have anything to do with me, that's their prerogative. But then they're not intellectuals. And yet they also claim not only to be libertarian, but to be intellectuals. They are not intellectuals if they excommunicate people for having a different view. And also on a personal level, I've been friends with these guys for 40 years. They won't speak to me anymore. I find that highly problematic. And therefore, I'm even more grateful to you 3 for putting up with me, even though you disagree with me. I mean, we agree on some things and we disagree on other things. That's what intellectuals are like. So let me end by thanking you guys for being part of this seminar with me.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, again, I really appreciate you all doing this today. This has been an incredible conversation, a lot for the audience to think about. I know I'm going to probably listen to this recording like 3 or 4 times on my own just to digest all of this. But again, guys, really appreciate your time today. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for putting this together, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This was great. Look forward to another time, anytime. No one's excommunicating anyone.
Yes.
Happy to talk. Okay.